Okay, I have 1 o'clock. So hello again, everyone. My name is Carrie Berger, and I am the Fire Program Manager for Forestry and Natural Resource Extension's new fire program. This is the final webinar in a series of webinars on fire prevention and preparedness that the fire program hosted for you in the month of May. In the last 2 webinars, we've learned what the fire problem is, what conditions are like around Oregon as we move into fire season. We also learned that humans are the #1 cause of wildfires and that those tiny little embers destroy homes. Finally, we learned what we can do to mitigate risk of wildfire around our homes and into our landscapes. If you've missed any of these webinars, you can find the recording on the Forestry and Natural Resource Extension YouTube channel. I'll provide you with a list of resources in a follow-up email, including the link to that YouTube channel. Today's webinar brings all that information together and focuses on fire-adapted communities and what it means to be ready, set, go. And we have a bonus. I've asked a local community emergency response team member to show us what's in his go bag. So I'd like to introduce you now to our panel of speakers. First up, we have Allison Green. Allison is the program coordinator for Oregon Living with Fire. Hey, Allison. Then we have Jen Diaz on the line. Jen is the program coordinator for the International Fire Chiefs Association Ready, Set, Go program. Hey, Jen. And then joining me from my hometown in Corvallis, we have Dave Busby, who is the city's Emergency Operations Center Director. And also with me in Corvallis is Erin Crawford. Erin is the safety officer at Samaritan Health Services and a volunteer with the Community Emergency Response Team. Thank you all so much for being on the line with me today. Okay, so now there's just a couple of housekeeping items we should discuss before getting started. First off, your audio has been muted, so please type any questions you have for the speakers in the Q&A window. Q&A can be found in the bottom portion of your screen and is labeled Q&A. I will be recording this webinar and will post it to the Fire Program website and that Forestry and Natural Resource Extension YouTube channel. Again, I'll provide those resources to you all in a follow-up email. I should also note that I'm attempting to broadcast this live on our Forestry and Natural Resource Extension Facebook page. So finally, I will be using the polling function to ask you all a couple of questions throughout the webinar. When I launch a poll, a window should pop up and you should be able to click your answers. If a window does not pop up, then go to the polling option found at the bottom portion of your screen and enable the polling function. Okay, so let's kick this off with a quick poll. This first poll helps us to understand who our audience is. Okay, so let me see here. Let me launch that. And I know some of you have been on all of these webinars, but please do go ahead and answer that poll. It's important for us to know for specific webinars where you're coming from and a little bit about yourself. So there's 3 questions up, and go ahead and answer those questions. We want to know where you're from. We want to know about you. Are you a woodland owner? Are you a private natural resources professional? And also, we want to know if you own or manage any forest land. So go ahead and take a minute to complete that poll, and then I'll share the results. So looks like most of our folks, Allison, are coming from the Willamette Valley, which has been typical of the webinars that I've been hosting. Hello, friends from Washington State. I see a lot of you on the line with us. That's great. A lot of woodland owners. Okay, just another second here, and I'm going to end that poll. All right, and actually results are still coming in, so I'm just going to give it another second. Okay, here we go. I'll share those results. So hopefully you can all see these results. It looks like most of the folks on the line today are from the Willamette Valley, and welcome everybody else. We have even somebody from outside the USA. Hello to you. We have a majority of other, and I imagine you're a homeowner or somebody like that. We also have a lot of woodland owners on the line, and a lot of folks that don't own or manage any forest land, and that's probably because you're a homeowner. And okay, that looks good. So I'm going to stop sharing these results and hand it over to you, Allison. So Allison, tell us, what exactly is a fire adapted community?
Well, perfect. I am really glad to be with you all here on a Friday. For those of you that live in Central Oregon, you will know that we also got some snow last night. So, you know, I know y'all in the valley probably got plenty of rain. Over here in Central Oregon, it's not safe for Memorial Day. Like, it's not safe till July, and then we end up getting snow. I had to pull my tomato plants in. I about killed them. So I'm going to kick us off today a little bit for you all to first set the definition of fire adapted communities and what that term actually means, and then what it may look like for implementation on the ground. Many of y'all are probably already doing a lot of these efforts that are leading into fire adapted communities, but I really want to hopefully set the stage, and then we can kind of dive in depth into Ready, Set, Go, and some emergency preparedness actions you can take at home as an individual homeowner. So what we'll do, I'm actually also going to share best practices for you all from local Oregonians kind of all over the state, as well as a few of our colleagues nationwide that are doing some of these best practices for fire adapted communities. So when we say fire adapted communities, you know, this is kind of what we're talking about, is it as a framework for community wildfire resilience. This is not a checklist, nor is it a one-size-fits-all. This is something where all of us have multiple places we can plug in and take actions toward being more adapted for wildfire and how to live with it, rather than, yay, I checked another thing off my list and now I'm at an endpoint for fire adapted communities. You know, essentially, all of us, as we know, our community is different. Even in the same county, our communities are different from area to area, city to city, small town to small town. So our economies are different, our ecosystem is different, people who live there are different. And so naturally, the framework that we apply to those areas are going to be different. There is not going to be a silver bullet that I'm going to send you all home with today for fire adapted communities. This is truly something that you can adapt and kind of put your fingerprint on what it means to be adapted to receiving fire and living with fire in your community. So I'm going to start with the who for you all. So we're kind of going to go through a couple of questions today for fire adapted communities before we get into concrete examples, but we have the who, we have the when, and we have the what. So for the who, when we talk about fire adapted communities, what probably comes to mind initially to you guys is probably a lot of our more traditional partners. So fire departments, rangeland patrol associations, Oregon Department of Forestry, federal land managers, and that might kind of be the starting point for fire adapted communities and fire professionals. But there are so many other folks that have a role to play and places to plug in here. And this will help have the buy-in in your local community, and it will also make sure that whatever best practice you're trying to accomplish in your local community, that it's going to reflect your local community. So a couple examples of this. One example that we've been seeing, especially in Southwest Oregon and Central Oregon, but honestly it's kind of taking root statewide, is this whole idea of smoke preparedness. Not just for wildfire smoke, which can be really long in duration, really thick, heavy smoke, but also some of that smoke preparedness for our communities that there's a lot of prescribed fire happening as well. So some communities are getting to the point where they are engaging with their local public health officials. They're engaging with some of those residents who may be very susceptible to smoke impacts, as well as their air quality regulators. A lot of the times, folks that we kind of dig into our silo, right? We dig into what we know best. And, you know, if I know prescribed fire best, but I don't talk to, say, a public health official or somebody who is very susceptible to smoke, that I'm missing part of that picture and part of that adaptation that then I can put into my community that's going to work for everyone. Also, some groups that are working together to either manage private lands or portions of federal lands right up against to our communities, they are engaging local tourism groups, are folks that are working in the forest products industry, folks that are also working as wildlife professionals or businesses, to make sure that the work that is happening in the community and right outside on those lands that border our communities, that are not only helpful to the environment, ecologically beneficial, but they're also economically beneficial as well. And so really thinking about who needs to be at the table, because 9 times out of 10, if you bring folks in at the very start to not just get something in the oven to have it come out half baked and present it later, but folks that are engaged in that idea from the get-go, you're going to have longer term buy-in and better buy-in and more acceptance, and you'll have more shoulders to help carry this forward. This work can be hard. This work can be very, very pushing a rock up a hill, as it were. And so having more people that have expertise in other areas that can connect you with those cultural brokers and leaders in the community will help you be more successful into the future. And also the when. So a lot of times when we talk about fire adapted community behavior or actions, people immediately think of fire-wise actions, right? They think about preparing their community, or they're just kind of like, oh, okay, well that happens before the fire, right? We don't talk about what happens during and after. So a lot of times we want to talk about this as a cycle. Fire adapted communities and adapting to living with fire is going to look different everywhere, but it also happens along the entire continuum of fire occurrence. So we have education, whether that's educating homeowners on how they can prepare themselves, or fire prevention education that comes out from organizations like Keep Oregon Green. That happens kind of after the fire, before the fire. We have things like prescribed burning happening, people debris, burning outside yard debris happening before the fire, and fire-wise actions happening before the fire. During the fire, we have folks who are evacuating safely because they took the actions to prepare ahead of time. And after the fire, we're also talking about how can we recover in a better way. So any point you can start engaging in fire adapted communities. You don't have to start before the fire. If you have a community that is starting after the fire, like some folks that had to up in central Washington or in California, they are still working on fire adapted communities. It just looks a little bit different. And then the what. So truly, when we're talking about fire adapted communities as a framework, there are multiple bins and ways that we can engage, but I love this graphic because not only does it show it as a cycle, but it gives us some examples, but this is not a possibility of all the hundreds of things that we can do. And this also gives us some ideas, but this does not give us that one size fits all approach. And so you'll see some things on this wheel. I'll kind of call out a couple things in the next few slides that you might say, hey, no, that's not going to work in our community, or hey, we've done some really great work on that particular topic. And then maybe it's time to look at this wheel and this graphic to see where else you can plug in for fire adapted communities as a framework. Oh goodness, my computer got excited and went a little far there. Sorry about that. So we will start here. These are the buckets, or the bins, as it were, for fire adapted communities. So everything from community engagement to wildfire response to public health. So these would be places where you could engage in this general topic, but how you engage in them will probably look a little bit different. Say for instance, I'm based in Central Oregon. So even in our local county, wildfire response is going to look different in, say, Sisters as it is going to look in Lapine. But they are both working on that topic. It's how they go about it is definitely different. And then, talk about the example programs that fit into these. So if we are going to talk about how we're going to engage in those bins or those categories, there are multiple places for us to plug in back and forth that might work for us. We might be just working on, business resiliency, but that may lead into long-term recovery planning and some of those more big ideas and things that will take years and years. Right now we might just be doing the fuel breaks with the goal of doing prescribed burning later. We might be doing a combination of these things in these bins, one of these things, and a few other options. But at the same time, it's how we engage and the actions you could be taking, and you don't have to take all of them to be engaged in fire adapted communities. So say, for instance, let's look at safety and evacuation. We may have some communities that are doing all of those examples in that green section. So we have folks that have their safety zones. They all have their go kits and evacuation plans, which if 100% of a community has all those in place, y'all are doing fantastic. Folks that are engaging in the Ready, Set, Go program and not just as this idea of, the text alerts on your phone, that they are looking at ways to improve their ingress and egress. Maybe a community has built a secondary access out of their community after realizing their fire risk. So we may have folks that are doing all of these. We may have a community that's like right now, the only thing we have capacity for and the only thing that we have community action and excitement for is, say, a Go Kit campaign in my neighborhood of 200 people. And that's okay. You are still working on your safety and evacuation and engaging in FAC. And there's a way to engage across the board in these concepts and in this framework. Or if we have resident and community action. This is another one where we'll see folks kind of float in and out on what will work the best as a starting point. You'll have folks that are saying they are not only engaging in defensible space activities. So as you guys have learned over these past few webinars, things you can do around your home to be better prepared. Taking care of that first 5 feet around your house, taking care of the first 30 feet around your house to make sure that it is not as susceptible to ember ignition. Changing things around your home and what it's made of to make sure that it's not as susceptible to embers. And then you take it a step further and go community-wide as a fire-wise site. You may have folks that's a pretty natural progression. You may have folks that start with fire-wise because they recognize the issue that starts with an action plan that then they can start taking steps toward defensible space and home hardening. So again, this is just another example of ways that you can be really flexible about what pieces you pull out and work on fire adapted communities and being better able to live with wildland fire without having to eat this entire elephant all at once. And so, ideas on concrete examples that are happening across the board, and, we'll kind of start as an individual, what you can do, and then as a community, next things, and kind of move all the way up to broader scale ideas. But I would say the first thing that we can do, especially now that Memorial Day weekend's around the corner, summer is around the corner, is the first step is do your part in preventing wildfires. Oregonians, we are going to experience fire. We have fire adapted ecosystems across the state. It just depends on the type of vegetation we have. But at the same time, even if we have natural fires occur, we don't want to be the human component in that causing more fires to happen. So, something as simple as if you're going camping, make sure your campfire is cold to the touch before you leave. This fall, if you're doing some outdoor debris burning, make sure it's not a windy day. Make sure that it hasn't been dry for a couple of weeks on end. And a lot of folks, I hate that I have to say that, as a, 1 acre parcel owner with a bunch of trees, I know how to safely burn, but a lot of folks don't. And so when we're talking about how to do this safely, start at the individual level, start with you. And then if you see a neighbor struggling on doing things safely, try to have a conversation with them about how to be a better steward of their land. If they're trying to burn on a hot, dry, windy day, go over and have a conversation with them about it, rather than, just like, oh, hope for the best and kind of hands off. Fire prevention is up to all of us because our fire professionals and our prevention folks, they can't be everywhere all the time. The other piece of this individual progress is taking care of your own space and folks in your neighborhood if you can. So this work is a lot more fun if you do it with other people. It's a lot more fun if you do it with other people. For folks that have spent a lot of time in the woods, you know how hard this work is, how difficult it is sometimes to be removing brush all day. I've worked with community members that, honest to goodness, have had competitions on who has the best scratches on their arms after pulling bitter brush all day. Making sure that you're keeping this as fun as possible and as exciting as possible will then make sure that these are more sustainable programs working together. But, as an individual, starting with fire prevention and safe burning practices if you can burn, and then making sure that your home is as ignition resistant as possible. And then moving up into these bigger ideas and bigger programs of working with your neighbors, maybe helping your neighbor that's 90 years old that can't pull their brush anymore, or clean out their gutters. Even in the crazy time of COVID that we are all living in right now, there's multiple communities that have done either work-ins or they have helped one neighbor in particular because they know they're having a hard time, are able to wave at them outside the window while they're helping them get ready for fire season. Really be thinking about, fire adapted communities is about resiliency. It's about togetherness. Because if we're not doing this together, then we are only as safe as our neighbor who isn't able to do something for whatever reason. And then also taking these community-wide approaches about how you can get rid of that debris, first of all, and hiring a chipper. All folks have to do, say, for instance, is get it to the roadside for either pickup or chipping, and that's a lot easier to achieve than telling folks like, oh yeah, hey, go find a trailer or go find a truck if they don't have one and haul it all the way to the landfill. I would really encourage folks to, in that same vein, if you have questions about what's going on your property, call your local extension agent. They are amazing at educational events and field trips. Call your local ODF office. Call folks that can come out and be that impartial view to help educate as many people as possible. Getting folks outside is one of the more exciting pieces of fire adapted communities because all of us love our property, we love our place. And so getting that education partnered with getting to go outside and then being with fire professionals and your neighbors, it has helped education move leaps and bounds into the future. Another piece, please be prepared for evacuation. If we have wildfire visit, you've done everything right around your property, but you're not ready to evacuate, you haven't quite taken that next step into individual preparedness. In Central Oregon in particular, wildfire visits us almost every single summer. I have go kits, my kid has go kits, I have go kits for my dogs. Making sure that you are ready to evacuate and do it safely and as calmly as possible is that key component into that next step of fire adapted. Is if your home is prepared and as ignition resistant as possible, then you got to make sure that you are prepared to leave it if you are asked to do so by law enforcement. Another piece of personal preparedness that I will touch on here is smoke preparedness. We talked about some of these collaborative efforts that are happening around how to think about it at a community-wide scale. As an individual, this is the time right now in May to actually purchase those HEPA filters or purchase those in-home ventilation systems for, heaven forbid, if we have a long duration smoke impact, to be ready to then say, hey, I can turn this on. Last thing we want to do is be caught in August and be like, oh my gosh, I wish I would have ordered that HEPA filter. I wish I would have been ready for smoke. And so thinking about it's not just our local smoke and local fires either. That 2% that get away from our fire professionals that are going to impact us. Sometimes we get smoke shared with us that we don't want. Sometimes it comes down from British Columbia. Sometimes it comes down from Montana. Sometimes it comes up from California. And so we don't want to be caught off guard, especially if we're super susceptible to smoke. This is the time to not only be ready for wildfire, but be ready for the smoke that sometimes comes along with it. And I think I will leave you all to the next presenter on a call for the human interaction. The problem we are in right now with more intense fire seasons, longer fire seasons, if this was purely a combustion fire problem, we would have had this solved by now. This is not just a fire problem, it is a people problem. We have so many different viewpoints and ideas and expertise and people that want to engage is do your best to make connections. There is a lot of human investment that will get you a long way in, say, being that spark plug in your neighborhood, being the person that brings people together. Attend a local meeting if they have them for, say, like a fire safe council. Volunteer at a local fire department. Find a way to engage and add capacity into these conversations. And then, jump into some of those educational events, learn why mule deer need better brush in the right place. Take your kid to go meet Smokey on why they can, how they can be safe with campfires. There are a lot of places where you can engage for a pretty short amount of investment and walk away with a lot of knowledge and education. And this work too, everybody is a teacher and everybody is a learner, and trying to go into that with the idea of, I'm going to walk out of this meeting with more than what I came in with. And I hope that I send people with ideas as well. So fire adapted communities is not just about what we do, but it's the who. And at the heartbeat is truly who is engaged and the people that are going to make it worth the time. So with that, I will thank you. I look forward to your questions a little bit later this afternoon.
Thank you so much, Allison, for that wonderful presentation. There's so many nuggets within your presentation. I was trying to just pull out one shining one, but there's just too many. So thank you so much for that. We're going to transition now to Jen Dietz. She is, like I said, with the Ready, Set, Go program, and she's going to tell us all about what it means to be Ready, Set, Go. Jen, whenever you're ready.
Thank you. Can you see me? My presenter panel went away. Just making sure. Sorry.
I cannot see you.
Okay.
Maybe try the lower left corner, the little video icon. Let me see.
Oh, I got it. Thank you.
Great. Hey, okay,
that
excellent.
Technical difficulty, but thank you, Carrie, and thank you, Allison. I think the best way to introduce the Ready, Set, Go program, or RSG, is building upon everything that has been touched on with fire adapted communities and in previous webinars, is that RSG is just one of the tools or resources you can use to help your community and organization on its fire adapted journey. And I think you'll see that the RSG program encapsulates a lot of the topics that have been touched on in previous webinars. And so I'm excited to give you an overview of what it means to be Ready, Set, Go. And the Ready, Set, Go program works with fire and emergency response agencies to help them encourage and engage their residents on taking personal responsibility to prepare well in advance of a wildfire, both for their personal safety and for their property. And this program is managed by the International Association of Fire Chiefs and was launched at the national level in 2011. And currently we have members in all 50 states and are very active in the state of Oregon. And I just want to start off by going over the platform that Ready, Set, Go entails. And it's to prepare you well in advance, but also during a wildland fire. And we have 3 tenets to take you through the stages. And ready, that means that residents and community stakeholders are taking responsibility, especially at the individual level, personal responsibility for preparing themselves and their property for wildland fire, both in terms of planning and mitigation. And moving to set, that's establishing that situational awareness so people are primed in the event that there is a wildland fire. And when you move to go, that's focusing on going early, evacuating as needed and as instructed. To dive a little more into that, what it means to be ready. I know the previous webinars touched on understanding the wildland fire threat, embers, and how they move. And part of being ready is understanding what that threat looks like in your area. And whether that's the typical high danger times or just understanding how wildfire can spread. And there's an established understanding of that. And then from there, response personnel understand that threat and then engage their residents in communicating that threat and what it means for each individual. And residents are ready when they understand the threat and then they take action to mitigate their risk. We at Ready, Set, Go look at it as several levels since we work with fire and emergency response agencies, we look at the organizational level of what it means to be ready, but also those organizations are engaging their individuals on that being ready at the individual level. So as Allison had mentioned, part of a fire adapted initiative could be a chipper program. So at the community level, there's risk fuels reduction and fuels treatment programs going on, whether that's creating a fuel break, if you're in an area where you can implement prescribed burning, chipper trailer programs are great as well. And then at that organizational level, there's also evacuation planning with interagency cooperation and everybody understanding their roles and responsibilities. Another example of a community ready level initiative would be conducting home assessments to then engage that individual on understanding how they can better prepare their property to be ignition resistant and have defendable space. And that ties into being ready at the individual level. And I believe it was touched on in another webinar with the home ignition zones, but creating that defensible space on your property, hardening your home, but then taking it further to be prepared for when there is a wildland fire and planning at the individual level for evacuation, creating a family or a household disaster plan and assembling a go kit. And I know later on this webinar, we'll touch on what you would put in a go kit and assembling that. Moving back to SET, as I had mentioned earlier, that's having that situational awareness and different ways of communicating that with fire danger levels and red flag warnings to put people on alert. And there's also notification systems in the event of an evacuation. And those are set up in place and heightened use during the fire danger times. Again, looking at the breakdown of being a community organizational level of SET and then the individual level of SET. Community fire departments, we look to providing that information to key residents and any outlets they can use to broadly communicate this to the public to enhance that situational awareness. So making the fire danger levels visible and well aware in different points of the community, both communicating red flag warnings when they're in use, but also what that means and what people should be primed to do during red flag warnings. And then having those methods of communication, whether it's reverse 911, whatever your notification system is at your local level, is already set up and pushed to the residents. At an individual level, you're set when you're monitoring those weather conditions. The go kit has already been assembled, but it's primed and you're on alert and registered for those notification systems. And the go piece of Ready, Set, Go, it really is dependent on the area, as evacuation looks different in every single area. But as Allison mentioned, whether it's local law enforcement, every community is different, but knowing or following the direction of that AHJ, the authority having jurisdiction, and then having that interagency cooperation at the community and the organizational level. And everyone is primed for that evacuation and encouraged to evacuate early ahead of, and the levels you're going at, it really varies with where you are with what levels that they use, but going at the earliest indication of evacuation, not waiting until you're at level 3 or it's an evacuation order. We really, with Ready, Set, Go, hope that people take that initiative to go early and they're primed for that. Now, what the Ready, Set, Go program itself does to help people along each of those pieces of Ready, Set, and Go is we provide different educational resources and materials that organizations at the community level can use to engage their residents. We have these materials available at no cost to our members, and it's free to sign up for the program. And these are things that we provide in print and electronic so that you can use them when you're engaging residents and individuals on this fire adapted journey. And so one of our key resources is our action guide, and those take individuals all the way through some of the things that we have already touched on with defensible space and the home ignition zones, but also what should be put into a go kit and assembling those pieces. And it has a checklist for each stage of Ready, Set, and Go. And those are available in English, and we have it translated in Spanish as well. So any Ready, Set, Go member can order those for their community and use them in their different outreach and engagement efforts. We also do have go bags available for order. There's nothing in the go bags, but they're a blue drawstring bag that you can use to prepare as your go kit. And again, those can be ordered by our members and shipped to you at no cost. And I know we'll be touching on what would go in a go bag later, but that's an actual physical tool you can use if you're trying to encourage your residents and your neighbors to set up their own go kits. And we also have, as I spoke on with the set piece, red flag warnings, not only knowing that there's a red flag warning in place, but knowing what that means and kind of a checklist of the precautions you should take to be set and ready during those phases. And so that's a new resource that we've developed within the past year that you can print very easily yourself, as it's a front and back page. It's one of our more easy to print resources that people can find electronically. Now, anyone that is a Ready, Set, Go member and active reporting in AMS can request these materials. And our staff is here to help you if you have any questions on reporting or anything with requesting materials. I will provide contact information at the end, but I just wanted to let everyone know some things that the RSG program provides so that you can be ready, set, and prepared to go. I touched on our AMS, which is our achievement management system, and that's a system reporting for our members that they can use both to provide information to us so that we can provide them materials, but it's also a system you can use internally to capture all those efforts, the different pieces that Allison was touching on, whether it's partner collaboration or fuels treatment project, evacuation planning. Our system can record all of that, and you can use it externally to share with your community stakeholders and elected officials. This is just a screenshot of what AMS looks like. We've really tried to make it as user-friendly as possible and as simple as possible, but still capturing key information. One other piece I wanted to share about the Ready, Set, Go program to make everyone aware is that in addition to those educational materials and the platform of helping you prepare for wildfire, the RSG program has a history of providing grants. And some of those have been grants for wildfire mitigation to conduct fuels treatments and mitigation projects in your area. And we also currently have just awarded grants to help customize materials to a specific community, take that RSG action guide and really tailor it down to the local level of the communities that we're working with. Right now, we don't have any applications open, but usually we do each year, and we notify our Ready, Set, Go members and post that on the website as soon as those opportunities are available. And in this time of the novel coronavirus, which has certainly altered the way we all have to operate and certainly presented some challenges in terms of community engagement, the Ready, Set, Go program is trying to provide support and ideas and initiatives to help people keep the momentum going. And we've talked about how important the individual level is. So something we've created for all our organizations is a Are You Wildfire Ready campaign that focuses on different challenges, whether it's the 0 to 5.
I'm starting that next week.
Thank you. 5 zone and what you can do in there, or doing that individual evacuation planning. And these are things that we want to push, that have communities and organizations push out to their individual residents. And we're trying to pre-package that so that it's available ahead of time. Because right now, this is a very important time to still be preparing at the individual level and properties. And it really does, a fire adapted community takes everyone's involvement, and that's more important now than ever when departments can't do face-to-face home assessments, and that community engagement with the restrictions on face-to-face and in-person and group gatherings. So we really want to stress the importance of having Ready, Set, Go at the individual level. And currently we're working with the IFC's Wildland Fire Policy Committee on some considerations that local communities and even at the state level can be taken with evacuating for any hazard during this coronavirus period, where there are the era of social distancing and all of the considerations that we have to mitigate that threat, how in times of wildland fire and other threats when evacuation is necessary, how it needs to adapt for that. So our recommendations aren't ready yet, but those will be published as soon as they are ready, and we'll release them on our website. And just in closing, this is available to anyone. Our website is public, and we have different social media outlets. So these will be shared in resources after the webinar, but providing them right now. Our team is here to help or answer any questions should you have any inquiries as to how the Ready, Set, Go program can help you at your community. We do focus on working with fire and emergency response agencies, but we do work with other community organizations because it does take everyone in this effort to be adapt to living with fire. And so that's just some contact information there. And another resource that will be sent out is the IFC created a fire adapted communities for the fire service online training, which is free and available to anyone. While it's designed to helping fire departments guide them through what they can do to help their community become more fire adapted, this is a resource that most individuals could learn a lot from, and it's about a 2-hour training program. So that is something to kind of build upon a lot of the things that have been touched on during this webinar series that would be available to you and will be sent out after. So thank you so much.
Great, thank you so much, Jen. That was fantastic. And so it's a good segue into Dave Busby. Dave, can you tell us about public health plans being built right now around COVID and a potential wildfire scenario?
Yeah, and thank you. It's really enjoyable to not talk about COVID related things, but unfortunately we can't stop. But wildfire preparedness, extremely great. I really want to congratulate Allison and Jennifer and you, Carrie. Thank you for doing this. From an emergency management standpoint, and Carrie knows this, we've worked a lot together. I'm really concerned about wildfire, even in this area. Our forests are pretty good as far as conditions, but you just never know. And I lived in a state to the south that I watched this go over several years. So I think this is going to be a continuing thing. The good news is some of this COVID response planning has really made us engage directly. Emergency management and public health are now basically joined at the hip to work through this process of COVID-19. And so we've developed mass care plans, we've developed sheltering plans, we've developed discussions around evacuation plans, and it really ties together with wildfire preparedness because it is going to be a community effort. It is not just the emergency management team or the fire team or any of that. It's all of us together. So the more that we educate people and work together, we will be that much better off. As far as a reference, FEMA just came out with the COVID-19 pandemic operational guidance for 2020 hurricane season. And if you take that and parallel it to wildfire season, there's a lot of similarities in there. And they're basically saying exactly what everybody just emphasized. The community needs to know where the information would come from. They need to know what to do and what their own responsibilities are. So it's extremely kind of parallel that these efforts are coming up. And that's kind of really the thought I wanted to convey. I can tell you that from an emergency management standpoint in this current disaster, we're working a lot with public health. We're working with our community partners, Oregon State University, the hospital, clinics, you name it, and trying to align messages a lot of ways. And I think the preparedness efforts go and align perfectly with the wildfire season coming up. So hopefully that adds to the discussion, and I appreciate you letting me join this.
Absolutely. And that is key, you know, to not have those silos, but to have everybody working together. That only makes sense. And so that's really great to hear that that's actually happening. And so what I'm going to do now is just give us a breather from all the presentations. I'm going to ask you guys that if you have questions to start putting those into the Q&A box. What I'm going to do now is launch, I have 3 polls. I've launched one already. I'm going to launch another one. This is an evaluation. And it just, what it does is it helps me measure the impact of this webinar and also helps me to improve future webinars. So I'm going to go ahead and launch that poll. And if you please go ahead and answer, you know, how satisfied were you with today's webinar? Are you going to use the information that you learned about today in your work or leisure? And then some more specific questions about direct actions you might take. So go ahead and sign on to that poll or click in your answers. We do have a question, and if the speakers wouldn't mind turning on their video if they're able. Somebody's asking about, for the Ready, Set, Go, Jen, you mentioned hardening your home, and what does hardening mean?
Yes, sorry, I should have clarified that. And it's focusing on making your house ignition resistant, making it fire resistant. And that's both the materials and different, you can either do that with, a new build or replacing a roof, but there's also simple steps to retrofit your existing home. And the Ready, Set, Go guide takes you through different components of the home, whether it's the roof or vents or eaves, and different places that you can work on to make it fire resistant to, say, the intrusion of embers that are coming sometimes a mile ahead of the fire, and different approaches that you can take to assess the structure itself and not just the vegetation around it.
Great, thank you. We have a question, and we might be jumping the gun a little bit, but I'll put it out there. Will an actual list of items to consider for your evacuation bag be given today? And I know Aaron's going to talk about that next. He's going to dive into the Go bag and give you examples. But is there, Aaron, like a print off of materials that I could provide to the folks in a follow-up email?
Absolutely, yes. I have a couple different links of Go bag content lists. I'm kind of a list guy, so I would definitely share that with you. Some are like 8 pages long, pretty detailed. I also like to give different price points too, because not everybody wants to spend a lot of money on a rain jacket or something like that, or put a very expensive tent in their car all the time, to possibly be stolen. So I definitely want to provide those different options at price points, to meet the needs of people's Go bags.
That's great, and I know I appreciate that different price point opportunity, so thank you for that. We have another question. What are the requirements in terms of authority having jurisdiction to get grants for the Ready, Set, Go? Obviously a fire adapted community, but other requirements like organization, or what are the requirements around that, Jen?
So we work with a number of different organizations, and that includes some federal funding. So each of our grant really varies on who is eligible. We do require you to be a Ready, Set, Go member, but you can still, it's free to register and sign up and be a member, and you can do that at the same time as you're applying for the grant. But for example, we've had a FEMA Fire Protection and Safety Grant Award, and then those times we can only really pass the awards along to fire departments. But when we partner with the U.S. Forest Service or insurance agencies, we've been able to provide them to a variety, as long as they don't have to be the authority having jurisdiction over evacuation. They just need to be involved in wildland fire mitigation. So we've done that pass through to local nonprofits. We've done it to some HOAs. So it really varies on the funding source, and the criteria is all made upfront clear to the applicant.
Great, thank you. So how do I get, or this person is saying, how do I get the information about Ready, Set, Go and the 2-hour training for my information in my neighborhood? And also, is this something BC CERT members should take part in?
I would certainly recommend anyone. While we created it for fire departments, we also made it as a introductory level training. So while it is talking about different things a fire department can do at points, I think an individual or anyone that's part of a CERT team or another organization involved in this issue, they can learn a lot from it, and it is free to join. And I'll provide the link. It's through the IFC's Academy, but that link will be provided to you, Carrie, to share with the rest of the group.
Perfect, thank you. Are there opportunities for organized volunteer work if, for example, you live in a large city but want to help with fire protection on other properties along the edges of the city or in more rural areas?
That isn't something that we have organized yet, but I do think that depending on the locality, there's different projects set up, and I'm sure that community prep day is a big day, and sometimes they probably would invite volunteers from neighboring areas as well.
Mm-hmm.
Another great place to start there is in our local community. In one of my previous gigs, it was truly like where the rubber meets the road, community mitigation work. And so looking for folks to help if you want to volunteer, starting with like your own faith-based or other faith-based organizations. They may know some folks in the community that need help, or starting with Rotaries, Kiwanis, Chamber of Commerce, folks like that that are really in tune on what's going on in the community. You can also reach out to your local Oregon Department of Forestry, like the Stewardship Foresters, because they are the ones that work very closely with those residents. So that would be the best place to start, in my opinion, if you're looking for volunteer opportunities.
That's great. Thank you. So this person has had difficulty contacting people at actual fire stations to find a resource for the metal address markers that they've seen rurally. Any ideas where they can purchase those?
I just walked on into the admin office. Typically, if you call and it's a smaller, more rural area, which, I live in La Pine, so, a town of 1,500 people, is typically there's no one there to answer the phone. And if they are, they're trying to handle other phone calls. They typically only have like one admin assistant. But typically those fire departments, they have them for sale. I think I paid $20 for mine. I got 2 of them. And they came with posts, the markers, the whole 9 yards. So if you're having a hard time getting through to them on a phone call, I would recommend, if you have the time, take your face covering in and go talk to them and see if you can get those. They also asked me, luckily my husband was willing to put them in the ground. They also asked if I needed any assistance putting them in the ground, at least for the posts. So, feel free to just go on in. They have, smaller departments. They don't have a lot of human capacity because they're normally out helping folks. So go on in would be my suggestion.
Great. That's really great. So thinking of the Paradise, the aka campfire in California, is it really safe to assume that there will be an agency issuing evacuation orders? My experience, I lived through one fire, is not wait for an official evacuation order.
Yeah, and I'll jump on that one. I saw that in writing there. And unless you have a proven system, now I live in a pretty rural area that actually has sirens, and we also have, for the city of Corvallis, we have a Nixle alert system. With all of that said, I would not be counting on an external agency or anybody. If you get aware of a fire, I know the Santa Rosa fire, there were more neighbors that saved lives than anything that local government could do to get the message out. And by letting your neighbors know would be really helpful. So to answer your question, yeah, I would not wait. It depends on the systems that you have. Know those systems, understand them, and also know their limitations.
Great. Well, so I think we've covered all the questions for now, and we've taken a nice break from presentations. They've all been fantastic. Thank you so much. We're going to roll into the go bag. Erin, everybody's super interested to hear your presentation and to see what's in your go bag. So if the rest of us would take off our video and mute our lines, Erin, it's all yours.
Thanks, Gary. So I will go ahead and share my screen. Okay, so yeah, my name is Aaron Crawford. I'm the safety officer for Samaritan Health Services, and I also happen to be the safety officer for the Benton County Community Emergency Response Team. Also, I'm an instructor for that team and the assistant program manager. And then a little bit of public health background too. I got my master's of public health here at OSU. So, let's see. I'm having a hard time advancing the slide. Carrie, do you have control of the PowerPoint by chance?
I don't. Go to the lower left-hand corner, and it's sometimes a faded little arrow button. There you go.
Oh.
Yeah.
All right, thank you. Okay, so one good place to start is kind of like what is a go bag? You've probably heard a lot of different terms for it. You know, there's bug out bag and go kit and go bag and get home bag. And there's a lot of, really what you want is versatility, and also not to get kind of tunnel vision about any particular disaster. So in emergency management, we look at kind of an all hazards type approach for everything, because you don't really know what's going to happen. Obviously, this is a focus on wildfires, so I'm going to try to tailor it to that. But at the same time, I wouldn't only have a go bag during wildfire season. As you know, or as probably most people know, we are susceptible to earthquakes, in particular subduction zone. The Cascadia subduction zone earthquake is definitely one that people are concerned about in terms of natural disasters around here. So really, I would suggest that people create a kit that is extremely versatile and that will help them out in a variety of situations. Another term for a go bag is a 72-hour kit, and that isn't really my favorite in terms of a phrase for that, just because with the right equipment and the right skill set, you can definitely survive for a whole lot longer than 72 hours out of just a kit. So next point I want to make is that the first rule about bugging out is under normal circumstances, it should be just don't bug out, because if you're really well prepared, in your home, and that's a really great place to have all those resources that you can never just fit in one bag or even in one vehicle. So you can have, well, it's recommended to have at least 2 weeks worth of food, but something more like 2 months would definitely be recommended, considering how long some of the critical infrastructure and the food chain and things like that could be compromised after something like a big earthquake. So it's a little hard to store all that in your vehicle. And also, it doesn't matter how much supplies you have. If that wildfire rolls through and you have short notice, and all you can really do is get in your vehicle and take off, then all those resources aren't doing a lot of good. So I kind of look at the go kit or go bag as the least common denominator when it comes to preparedness in terms of actual supplies, because it's even though you can have things in your vehicles, sometimes you'll run into a situation as you're evacuating where you can no longer proceed with that vehicle, and you're going to have to hoof it on foot, and then that go bag is really where that's going to come in handy there. And as it's been mentioned earlier, we really do want to leave as early as possible when you have very good reason to believe that a wildfire is getting dangerously close to your residence, and absolutely, you'll want to sign up for any of those mass notification systems. Like locally, the Lynn Benson Alert is a Everbridge-based system that can give you some early warning. And also speaking about vehicles, while you do want to always have your go bag in each of the vehicles that you have, it's also a really good idea to have that pre-stocked with some things that maybe just won't actually fit into a go bag. So things like maybe 5 gallons of water, although there's something to be said for having several 1-gallon jugs of water, just because it's so heavy to kind of try to cart around 5 gallons. And another thing is having some tools in there. Some that could be automotive tools. You don't want to be evacuating, all of a sudden, have a flat tire and realize, that you don't have the ability to change that tire, or if your, engine breaks down. I mean, that might seem like unlikely, but things happen. So we want to be ready for any of those contingencies. So what I'm getting at is that you might really have to live out of that vehicle for a while. So while you might be evacuating and then get to an emergency shelter, but that shelter could be very overfilled, and then to bring COVID-19 into this, emergency shelters aren't necessarily the safest place these days, and it can be very difficult to maintain social distancing and so forth. So I'm not saying I'm not saying don't go to an emergency shelter if you have to, but there are certainly times where you might there might not be one set up yet. You want to just get in that vehicle and go and hopefully be able to get out of that area. But then you might be living out of that vehicle for a while if you don't have any other outside resources. So definitely a good idea to have some supplies in there. So kind of think of your vehicle as an extension of your go bag and an extension of your capabilities. But again, you might be in a situation where it's just a road, and we saw this, in the Camp Fire and various other California wildfires where you get boxed in, and while I wouldn't say just as soon as you're boxed in, get right out of your car and and start running or anything, because it might be that line will start moving. But if the fire is getting really close and it's just not going to be an option, then sometimes you might actually have to evacuate on foot. And then, as it's been discussed earlier, having an evacuation plan is extremely critical. So you want to kind of use that model of the before, the during, and the after. Like what steps can you take not only to mitigate danger to your home, but what are the steps you need in terms of putting your kit together. So it can be pretty expensive to buy a kit all at once, and you don't necessarily want to buy a pre-made bag. I'll touch on that on the next slide, but you want to have that equipment and also know how to use it. And then in terms of an evacuation route, that you definitely want to have some alternate routes established if at all possible. And then finally, you absolutely want to drill that plan ahead of time, before it really counts. So I like to have a bag in each one of my vehicles. It's also a good idea to have a small bag even at your place of employment, like in your office if you have space for that. However, the most important part about having in your vehicle is that typically your vehicle is going to be with you at home when you're home, and it's going to be nearby when you're at work. So having your primary kit in your vehicle is generally what I recommend. And if you're evacuating with your whole family, of course, you're going to want a bag for each person, because while you can share some of the heavier equipment or things that maybe each person doesn't necessarily need in your kit, you do want to make sure that each person has clothing and some supplies that can address their needs. So as I think we mentioned earlier, you want to consider your kids and your pets. So they have go bags essentially for like dogs, for example. Roughwear is a company that makes basically backpacking style dog packs. So when you're backpacking, you don't have to carry your dog's food and things like that. So you want to have the medications and food, and also account for the water that your pets will need as well. Another good idea is that if there's that kind of worst case scenario and you had an infant and you had to evacuate partially on foot, then having either a stroller or there's some backpack style carriers that you can get as well. Also, you really want to tailor that bag to you. It's kind of why I don't prefer those pre-packed bags, because you really want to take a lot of things into consideration. So not everybody is capable of carrying around a 50 or 60 pound pack, and I generally wouldn't recommend that anyway, because lightweight is, especially if you have to move, and especially considering this is going to be something to meet, a bag that's going to meet your immediate needs, potentially just for a few miles or just to kind of get out of that danger area. So light is definitely a good way to go. But you also don't want to just see something on YouTube, like some piece of cool gear, and then buy it and then put it in your pack and then never use it, because it's not going to do a whole lot of good if you don't have the skill to actually operate that piece of equipment. And then finally, environmental considerations are huge. And while with wildfire season, you might think that there's not a lot of chance of things like hypothermia, but especially at night, or especially if you're cold, then that can be an issue, which we'll kind of get into a little later. So as far as items, I really recommend that you choose things that have multiple uses. Like if something only has one use, it better be like in a really important use, like water, for example. So so an example of something that's multi-purpose could be, well, like a multi-tool is a good one, but also like a poncho tarp is a really good one, because it can be your rain gear, it can be something that you can use as a shelter, you can collect water with it. I have an orange one that can be good for signaling as well. And then you do want to go out. I recommend, if it's within your physical capabilities, taking a little hike with your pack, and maybe if you're really into it, doing an overnight camping trip and see if you can live out in the woods with your pack. And that might seem a little bit extreme, but in certain disasters, you kind of want to go bag that looks like what you'd have for backpacking in a wilderness area, because without the running water and power and things that we kind of take for granted now, a lot of areas essentially will be a wilderness area. All right, so one concept I like to talk about in presentations I give about go bags is called the rules of three. Now, this is not something I came up with. I modified it a little bit, but it has to do with human physiology and our needs, and kind of bringing it back to that all hazards approach, where no matter what the disaster is, you're going to have those same physiological needs for your body. So, and in the rules of three, it's just kind of an easy way to remember that. So I'll kind of start with the 3-second rule being trauma to the central nervous system, 3-minute rule being lack of oxygen to the brain, and then 3-hour rule kind of not having a good core body temperature, and then basically 3-day rule of dying of dehydration, and then the least priority, generally speaking, would be food, because it takes the longest to die from the lack of it. All right, so 3-second rule. Again, this might seem kind of out there, and it's also something that that I generally use for multiple different types of disasters. But yeah, things like falling objects, or in particular for this topic, then car crashes are important, because there have been times where there's been evacuations where then more people die during the evacuation than the actual disaster itself. There was a study done in the 2011 Fukushima nuclear incident after the Tohoku earthquake, and there was actually a higher association of dying from evacuation than sheltering in place, even in a situation where you'd think getting out of there would be really high on your list. Another thing is you kind of want to be ready for some of those car accidents if they happen in the process of evacuation. So I recommend having a commercially made glass breaker and seatbelt cutter either attached to your visor or somewhere where you can grab it if you rolled over, or ended up in a ditch and needed to be able to either break the glass or cut your seatbelt. And then just general vehicle maintenance and then fuel, for that matter. Kind of trying to make sure that your gas tank is topped off, especially if you know that there's potential for wildfire evacuation. So for the 3-minute rule, we're kind of looking at this is extremely important to wildfire evacuation, because a lot of fires, the majority really, it's not really the fire that'll get you, it's the smoke inhalation. And while the 3-minute rule can also apply to things like hazardous chemical plumes, with wildfire, smoke is a serious consideration. So you, of course, want to evacuate before it gets so close that it's really smoky, but even if the fire is not that close, you can have some, as we know, especially from 2 years ago, there's a whole lot of residual wildfire smoke. And while remaining indoors and having those HEPA filters and other types of filters on your HVAC system is a very good idea. It's actually a really good idea to have N95 respirators for attenuating wildfire smoke. And of course, with COVID, those are a little harder to find sometimes, but that is kind of another reason to have those N95s, is because if you did end up in a situation where you were in an evacuation shelter, then an N95 is also going to come in handy. I do need to put on my safety officer hat here and say that just having an N95 doesn't mean that you're really going to have that 95% of the particulate. Basically, what an N95 is that it removes 95% of airborne particulates. But that is if it is fit tested, and that if you don't have a beard and things like that. So at the hospital, we have to actually fit test these, because the N95 is generally a medical grade respirator. So if you don't have one of those, most of us now have homemade cloth masks, and while that is certainly not as good as an N95, especially if it's wet, they can be used to kind of give you some relief from that smoke. And another thing that has to do with oxygen in the brain is that when you think about if you have a car accident or something like that and you have severe bleeding from that, if you die from hypovolemic shock, that's essentially a lack of oxygen to your brain. So having a trauma kit that includes a combat application tourniquet and pressure dressings and things like that is a really good idea. And also having the training. So you can go to stopthebleed.org and find local training. Although the training for that is a little bit trickier, with social distancing and whatnot. So the 3-hour rule, so the fancy word for that is the thermoregulation. So as humans, we need to try to keep our core body temperature as close to 98.6 as possible. So you want to basically avoid getting really hot or avoid getting really cold. And as Oregonians, I know there's some people that are not from Oregon, but it's a really good idea to layer your clothing, and in your go bag, think about having those layers. So that means base layers, and mid layers, and waterproof layers. So a base layer being something like long underwear. Wool is a really good one because it still retains some insulative capabilities, even if it's wet. But it's also a good idea to have wool beanie and gloves and things like that as well. But even if we're talking about wildfire season, it could still rain, and if you get wet, and especially at night, then hypothermia is still a real risk, and that is truly what kills the most people out in a wilderness survival situation. So having some waterproof layers is a really good idea. And then, while you'd hope that in a wildfire evacuation you'd be able to make it to some type of shelter before you needed it, but you never know, so it's kind of good to hope for the best and plan for the worst. And having a shelter system that's fairly lightweight, like just a cheap poly tarp is good, but also during the show and tell portion, a Bivy sack or bivouac sack that can be really good at keeping that core temperature balanced while you are not moving, at night. And then, as I mentioned, a poncho tarp is really versatile because it is basically it can serve as your waterproof layer and your shelter. And then having some 550 cord or paracord to help set up your shelter is also a really good idea. And then another aspect of that is your sleep system, and I'll show some examples of that when we do the show and tell part. And as you notice, I'm kind of going through the slides first, and then we'll do the show and tell, so it's not quite so back and forth. And now this last part, again, this is kind of more for this all hazards approach, because if it's in the middle of fire season, you're probably not going to want to just start a fire, unless it's very well contained and it's a matter of life or death, like preventing hypothermia. But having the ability to start a fire in your go bag, so having a ferrocerium rod and a lighter and things like that is a really good idea. And also the tools to process wood, even in wet weather, to be able to get a fire going for all the benefits that a fire provides. So the 3-day rule is also extremely important, because while it still takes a few days to actually die from dehydration, especially in a situation where you're probably very hot because there's a wildfire nearby, you're really going to want to stay hydrated. So having the ability to both carry water and purify it is really good. And as you can see on there, water is quite heavy, so the old rule of thumb for preparedness is 1 gallon per person per day, but carrying around even a gallon of water is gonna make your pack go up quite a bit in weight. So you want to try to keep that pack weight down. So kind of knowing where you can find surface water sources and then purify those, and then instead of having to carry a lot of water is a really good idea. So, and I'll show some examples of those containers and filters next. So the 3-week rule, that's again the lowest priority, but like water, if you don't have some of your blood sugar up and you have some quick energy, then your performance is going to deteriorate. So as far as the food that you're going to pack in your pack, I really recommend things that are very energy dense. So things like peanut butter are good. It does have kind of a shorter shelf life than some, but peanut butter is a good option. I really like to pack several freeze-dried backpacking meals, such as Mountain House, because they're very lightweight and they, decent energy density. But the nice thing is that you can put them in your pack and, well, you can have them for backpacking, but you can still keep them in there for literally 25 years without having to worry about cycling them out. The disadvantage is that unless you just want to crunch on some freeze-dried food, you are going to need to rehydrate that and then preferably have a way to heat that up. So that takes a little bit of time, and you also have to have some heat source. So having energy bars or protein bars is a really good idea. And then if you are going to be actually cooking those backpacking meals, you are going to want to have a means to do that. So a mug or a stainless steel or a titanium pot is a really good thing to have. And then a small gas stove is great because then you can heat that without having to make a fire and kind of add to the wildfire problem there. And then some people will look for MREs, which stands for Meals Ready to Eat, and they're kind of what are issued to service members in the military. And I can tell you from personal experience that, they're not really the best. They're also rather heavy and not all that energy dense compared to things like freeze-dried backpacking meals. So I would just go ahead and skip that. They also don't last nearly as long as freeze-dried meals. So another really important thing is communication. So during a big disaster like a wildfire, cell service can very easily be compromised with all the people taking up that bandwidth at once trying to make a call. So it's a really good idea to get your ham radio license and then have a ham radio that you can use to communicate outside of the affected area. It's also a good idea to have a crank NOAA radio to be able to receive some of those emergency broadcasts. And another really important part is navigation. So especially if you were say out in the woods when a wildfire struck and you needed to be able to find the highway or something like that, then having a good quality map and compass, and then of course the skills to use it, because of course that's when the GPS will fail, is right when you need it. So as I mentioned, a trauma kit in your vehicle is a really great idea. I like to separate a trauma kit from some less urgently needed medical supplies like medications. So you do absolutely want to have personal medications. A 2-week supply is great if you can get it. And then if you had to evacuate and for whatever reason, like say there was a car accident and someone had a fractured leg, then the ability to splint and wrap a fracture is a really good idea as well. So personal protective equipment or PPE, we already mentioned N95s, but it's also a really good idea to have work gloves and also nitrile gloves. And then as far as tools, it's a good idea to be able to have something that can break that glass if you are in a vehicle, something to process wood if you are in a situation where you can safely have a fire. And then automotive tools are a good idea. I wouldn't like to take the weight of various wrenches and things like that in my vehicle, so that'd probably be something that you'd have in your vehicle and not your bag. And then finally a sharpener for any of the blades you have, because a dull knife is much more dangerous than a sharp one. So also extremely important is a headlamp so you can see what you're doing. And then if it is kind of a long-term disaster, then things like a solar charger is really important. And then hygiene kit with a kind of emphasis on alcohol-based hand sanitizer is a really good idea, especially if you make it to that emergency shelter and they might be running low on it. And it's definitely, hand hygiene is going to be really important in those situations. And another thing that you might not be able to grab in the middle of an evacuation is all those legal documents and identification and things like that. So having a flash drive, preferably an encrypted one, that has the insurance information and the deed to your house and things like that on there. Also ways to prove that you are you, so you can talk to FEMA, at the Red Cross shelter once that's up and going. And then before I moved on to the show and tell part, I want to just do a quick plug for Benton County CERT. So if you haven't heard of CERT, it is basically a national, or actually an international organization that is at the community level, where you're having regular old civilians that are trained to essentially supplement the first responders that we know are going to be overwhelmed in some of these disasters, and then also be able to safely help your neighbors during these disasters. So we have units on, just your basic disaster preparedness, but also how to put out small fires, and then how to splint a wound, how to stop the bleeding, arterial bleeding, things like that, and then how to safely go into a building and do some light urban search and rescue and get some of the people that may have been trapped, after an earthquake and things like that. So lately we've been doing about 4 classes a year, but with COVID-19, that's been a little bit put on hiatus for social distancing reasons and things like that. So, but if you want more information about Benton County CERT, you can certainly reach out to me, and then I've got my my contact information on there, and then we could also have that with Carrie. Carrie can distribute that as well. So I'm going to go ahead and do, I know I'm running out of time a little bit, but real briefly, just kind of talk about some of the most important parts of a go bag there. So
Aaron, can I interrupt you?
Yeah.
Are there those, and I've taken that CERT training through you and your team in Benton County, and it's been fantastic. I learned a ton, and happy I did so. So I know there's one in Benton County. Are there other CERTs that you know of in other counties of Oregon?
Absolutely, yeah.
Okay, great.
Yeah, Polk County has a really good program. Marion County. I mean, I can't speak to each of the counties, but there's a fair number of them. I would say at least half, if not most, of the especially the larger counties have a CERT team. So it's definitely something that you can sometimes it goes through the sheriff's department. Sometimes it's more of the city level. So if you have like an emergency management page, for your respective city, then they'll usually have information about your local CERT.
Okay, good to know. So while Aaron is preparing to show us some items, why don't you go ahead, if you have questions, get those into the question and answer box so that when he's finished showing us the items, we can address those questions. Thanks, Aaron.
Sure. Okay, so I'll go ahead and while they're asking the questions, I kind of talk about some of the key items in the bag. So as far as we'll kind of skip over the the 3-second rule and 3-minute rule and go right to the 3-hour rule. So it's a really good idea to have the layers that I mentioned. If you're looking for an inexpensive type of rain gear, there's a company called, I guess first I should say, I'm not affiliated with any of the brands I'm going to mention. I'm not paid or anything like that. So this is just stuff that has worked for me. So this is, Frog Togs is a brand, but they make both poncho tarps and then full rain gear for very inexpensive, and it seems to be pretty good quality. So having a waterproof layer is really good. And then this is a Sea to Summit poncho tarp. It's probably kind of hard to see, but it's very lightweight. And then you can see it's orange, so you can kind of use it for signaling. So that's kind of you'll be able to kill 2 birds with 1 stone there. And another really good thing to have is, so this is from Adventure Medical Kits, and it's called their Escape Bivy. So this is something that reflects about 95% of your body heat back at you, and you can kind of think of it as a lightweight, waterproof sleeping bag. So you probably don't want to put like a $250, sleeping bag in your car all the time in case it gets stolen. So this is kind of something that you can have in there that can fulfill the roles of both a shelter system and a sleep system. So that's kind of a good one there. And in terms of water, one thing I like to promote is having different means of purifying water, including boiling. So one thing I like to do is have a Nalgene bottle like this, and it nests with a titanium mug. So basically I can boil water with this and I can carry water. And then I've also got, you can tell, but there's Gorilla Tape, duct tape wrapped around there. So you know it's like literally anything that's cylindrical, I will wrap duct tape around because it's awesome. So another thing having to do with water is this is a Sawyer mini water filter. And this bad boy is about 20 bucks, but it'll filter 100,000 gallons of water without needing to be replaced. They also have the standard Sawyer squeeze that will filter 1 million gallons for just a little bit larger and a little bit more money. And the nice thing about this is that you can attach a little straw, so kind of like a life straw, so you can drink directly from a source. And then it also comes with a bag. These little collapsible water containers are nice because it just threads on there, and then so you can have dirty water, directly from like the Willamette River, and just squeeze that, and then it'll come out clean. One thing is it doesn't. It goes down to about 0.1 microns of filtration, so it doesn't get things like viruses, but it will get the protozoa that we commonly have in the surface water around here. So another important thing is, as I mentioned, having tools. So a Leatherman multi-tool. It's another local company. It's a good thing to have. So let's see. This. So I talked about having paracord. So this is it's called Titan Survivor cord, and while paracord has about 550-pound tensile strength, this has 1,000 pounds because it also has fishing wire, or snare wire and fishing line, and then even some fire starter like built in there. So it's a little more expensive than most, but that's a really good thing to have. And so as far as food goes, I kind of mentioned that freeze-dried backpacking meals are good, but having a little stove like this would allow you to. This is something that backpackers will use, and it kind of just folds out like that. You can put your pot or your mug that you're going to boil water on there, and then you can safely boil that without burning the forest down. So kind of important there. Personal protective equipment is a really good thing. So having a helmet and leather gloves is a really good idea. It's also having something reflective like this is a really good idea because, especially if you're evacuating and then it's at night and you've got other people evacuating, you don't want to become a casualty from getting hit by a vehicle. And I also like to put in here it's a disposable emergency stretcher. So while there are ways that actually in CERT we teach you how to how to transport survivors that are that are non-ambulatory because of a fracture or something. But this is a fairly lightweight way that you could take like say 6 people and then use it like a litter to carry someone hopefully a short distance. And I know we're running out of time, but so a few other things to share, but I could definitely talk more specifically about some of that gear once we hit the quick question and answer phase. So.
Thank you so much, Aaron. That was super interesting, and I know during the CERT training, and actually when you came out for my neighborhood evacuation and displayed, you always have so many great things to look at, and so a wealth of knowledge. And we do have some specific questions towards what you just showed. And can you give the resource for the water filter again? Somebody was asking about that.
Yeah, so the company is called Sawyer, like Tom Sawyer. And so they make a variety of other outdoor products like insect repellent and things like that. But lately, they're the most famous for these Sawyer filters. And they have a wide variety of them as well. They have one called the 0.02, which goes down to 0.02 microns. So that is enough to get viruses out of your water and things like that. So it's it's a really good company. I'm not saying there aren't other good microfilters out there, but I like it because it doesn't take batteries. It's fairly easy to use and pretty durable, and it's the type of thing where someone that's hiking like the Pacific Crest Trail will have just that filter, and in any water they come across, essentially they'll be able to filter. So it's nice and lightweight. It weighs a little less than 2 ounces, so pretty good resource.
And what about the Bivy bag that you showed? What was the make on that?
So that was Adventure Medical Kits. And as far as like where you can find these things, you know, well, Amazon, you know, like most things, you know, you can find them on Amazon, but some of the things like the Sawyer, places like Walmart actually will carry them now.
And Pam, who is also a CERT member online with us today, is saying, you know, Bimart carries a lot of this stuff. So visit your local Bimart. One more question here. There's a flood of information that you just presented, and thank you. That person says, is there a resource that categorizes the items for a Go Kit into groups like absolutely necessary or nice to have or luxury and stuff like that?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, the resource I'll send you that we can put you know, on the resource page, it kind of goes into that. So I would kind of use that that rule of three concept that I was talking about as far as like priorities, and one other kind of strategy is that you can always, you know, put more than you think you need in there to begin with. There's something that's maybe nice to have, but then you know, if you need to use it, it's not like it would be the end of the world if you had to, you know, basically drop something that was on the heavier side from your pack if you just couldn't carry that pack anymore. So I would kind of, while you do want to keep it as light as possible, you know, you can kind of start with you know, things that are maybe nice to have and not absolutely critical. But definitely, you know, maintaining that core body temperature and staying hydrated are some of the most important things. And thankfully, a lot of those items are not overly heavy, you know. So it's yeah, important to think about lightweight and then things that you can use for multiple purposes.
Absolutely. So we're at the end of our time, and I'm going to launch one more poll. Here we go. And I'm just curious how many of you already have a go bag, just a yes or a no. And then after watching this webinar, will you create a go bag if you don't already have one? And, you know, you can say, heck yeah, or yeah, too much work, or maybe, and that was nah, too much work. So go ahead and add your answers there. And I just want to end by thanking so much all of the panelists, speakers today coming online, sharing all this really important information. And so 3 weeks ago, we started with our first webinar that then built on the second webinar. And this is the final webinar, which, you know, summarizes from the previous. And so if you haven't already joined us for those other webinars, go ahead and look at them on our YouTube channel. I'll share that resource. Aaron will get me all his resources, and likewise the other presenters too, and I'll share that in a follow-up email. So thanks again. Thank you all to the attendees who joined us online for this hour-and-a-half session. You know, just please be safe, be smart out there. We're going into Memorial Weekend. Everybody's itching to get outside and do some camping. And yeah, just be safe out there. So thank you so much again for participating, and to the speakers. Y'all have a good weekend.